Hello everybody and welcome to Parks Bros. It's Drew here, and today we're going to be heading to Knott's Berry Farm for a classic. We're reviewing Montezooma's Revenge. Montezooma's Revenge originally opened at Knott's Berry Farm in Buena Park, California on May 21st, 1978. This Schwarzkopf looping shuttle coaster originally launched its riders through a flywheel launch system and backwards and forwards through one vertical loop. But in recent months, this ride has undergone the beginnings of major renovations and currently will not reopen until 2023. While it's not been officially announced what changes will be made to this roller coaster during this year-long period, many have speculated that the launch may be changing or potential other details around the ride will change as well. With all that stated though, let's move into the stats, as Montezooma's Revenge includes a 55-mile-an-hour launch, with that top speed being 55 miles an hour, a top height of 148 feet, a full length of only 800 feet, which is kind of surprising, and a full duration of 36 seconds. This is also the only roller coaster at Knott's Berry Farm to feature a backwards portion, and is still the only coaster of its kind on the entirety of the US West Coast. With all that said though, let's figure out how to get there. Montezooma's Revenge is located in the Fiesta Village section of the park and can be found through a quite simple route. Once you enter into Knott's Berry Farm proper, immediately turn to the right towards the Camp Snoopy section of the park. Walk all the way through this section through its twisting and winding roads until you find yourself going underneath Jaguar. From this point, you're going to make a quick left-handed U-turn and the entrance for Montezuma will be right there. Now, obviously, this review may be quite outdated within a year's time, but I will be reviewing Montezuma in its original form. So from this point, once you enter the queue, there are quite a few switchbacks underneath the backwards spike portion before you'll end up walking along that brake portion and eventually head up a set of ramps toward the station. These ramps can give you a nice little view of Camp Snoopy, and before you know it, you'll be placed in one of 14 rows across this 28-rider train. Now that you've taken your seat, let's find out how those seats really work. Since Montezooma's Revenge is the oldest looping coaster within the park, it features quite blocky seats, for lack of a better word. There's no ergonomic curvature, it's just a straight seat back combined with a headrest. Not that this is uncomfortable or anything, it's just very different compared to most of the other rides at the park. Once you sit down though, you'll make sure to buckle that seat belt before pulling down quite a thin lap bar, and if you've been on coasters from especially the 70s and 80s, this is a pretty common type of restraint that could be seen on anything from New Revolution at Magic Mountain to Magnum XL 200 at Cedar Point. And to be honest, for most of this ride, it won't feel like there's a full restraint there, which even adds to the excitement just a little bit more. But with that said, let's hear this iconic spiel and launch out of the station. Montezooma's Revenge does not waste any time getting you going on this entire experience. You'll hear that famous spiel saying, "Riders, please prepare for launch," and before you know it, you'll hear a click, the lights go dark, and then you're blasting out of that station up to 55 miles an hour in 4.5 seconds. Now, this launch being a flywheel launch is very different in comparison to a lot of newer launch coasters around the United States and world. This is especially true in how the launch system actually works, but even more noticeable is how it feels. This launch portion, which starts your ride off, feels like a slow pull, which gradually ends up getting more and more intense as you go along that launch track. It feels like it does not give up until it has to when it hits that vertical loop. And to be honest, to this day, it is still easily one of my favorite launches of all time. There's just something unmistakable about it. And there's only one launch coaster I can think of that I've been on that feels kind of similar, but not at all the same, and that's Powder Keg at Silver Dollar City, which features a pneumatic launch system. Moving back to Montezooma's Revenge, though, this launch will put your head towards the back of the headrest, even if you weren't in that proper riding position. And before you know it, you get vaulted into this wonderful vertical loop. These circular loops are a personal favorite of mine. If you could not tell by my actual newer logo, it is literally based off of Montezooma's Revenge's loop specifically, just because of how much I adore this moment of the ride. As you pass through another lit up ring towards the end of that launch track, you'll just start to feel incredible amounts of positive G-forces pushing you down into your seat no matter where you're sitting on the train. It's said that a lot of these circular loops can reach upwards of 4.5 Gs, and you can definitely feel it for about a split second when you're entering and exiting these loops especially. But the interesting thing about these loops is at the fact that you get to the top, you'll get some incredible hang time. You'll feel like you're floating out of your seat just a little bit while you're upside down. And going forwards through this loop is just incredible if you ask me. But before you know it, you'll feel that same type of positive force as you exit the loop before vaulting upwards into that near vertical spike, which has an end on the track. Don't worry though, you're not going to be falling off the coaster or anything. It isn't physically possible, but I know a lot of people think that when they first see the ride and really go, oh my gosh, I don't want to ride that one. While it doesn't pull a Thrillville off the rails moment, it does give you a beautiful view of the surrounding park and a cool little moment of near weightlessness where you kind of start to float just a tiny bit before heading backwards toward that loop again. Heading backwards through this vertical loop is even better than going through it forwards, as it adds quite a different feeling to what you're used to. Instead of kind of pushing you along through the loop itself like it does in the forward-facing version, when you're going backwards, it pulls you through the entirety of the element. So you'll feel that immense positive G-force going into the loop, but towards that top, that hang time backwards is insane. It is one of maybe 5 or 6 moments on coasters that still give me butterflies to this day, especially towards the back row, and heck, even the front row has some great moments too. But if any part of this ride makes you feel weightlessness, it's gonna be this portion right here, because there is not a feeling in the world like being pulled out of your seat like you do on the top of Montezuma's Revenge's loop. With that said though, immediately following that, you'll hit some positive G-forces quite intensely again and shoot backwards across that launch track. This portion of the ride just kind of has you feel speed going backwards, which is kind of cool and a really cool visual moment, especially if you're in the front row, before darting through that station yet again and past it. From this moment on, you'll go through a little bit of straight track more before vaulting into that secondary spike, which is arguably my second favorite moment of the ride. Again, you'll get a beautiful view of the park. I would even argue more beautiful than the first. And if you're in the back especially, you can get some insane airtime coming down. As this ride is quite old, it's not exactly perfectly smooth anymore, and there's little bumps in the track that make it feel like you get an extra pop of airtime right before you flatten out after the spike. And boy, oh boy, that part of the ride was the most insane airtime throughout the entire experience. Before you know it though, you'll hit those immense brakes, which will stop you quite a few times to make sure you're in the right position exactly. You'll hear that loud clank and the restraints will come up and your experience on Montezuma's Revenge is officially over. From this point, you'll get up, grab your stuff from the side of the station, walk down those steps, and voila, you have finished your full ride. Now, here's my question. Are you going back for more? It's officially time for my full thoughts and ratings. Let's get into the full thoughts first. This thing is, or at least has become, my favorite coaster at Knott's Berry Farm. I know a lot of you are probably thinking, wait, what about Accelerator? What about Ghost Rider? Yeah, no, I think those are definitely better rides overall, for sure. There's no question about that at all. But I just have fallen in love with the experience that Montezuma's Revenge gives. It's that classic feel. It's not perfect. It has you going through moments that don't feel natural whatsoever. And that launch, at least until a couple of months ago, gave such a thrill. Sure, it's incredibly short, but it never really had too long of a wait, at least in the past couple of years. And as you can see by my logo, I really ended up attaching to this ride quite personally. It was just a good old classic fun time, and I'm incredibly interested to see what types of changes are going to happen on the ride in the next year. But the ride experience was just such a fun time overall. It had those fun, thrilling moments, and of course, that amazing air time and hang time and positive forces. The only thing it didn't really have was lateral forces, but this entire ride is a straight line. The cool thing about it, though, is the fact that it's not nearly as intense as something like Accelerator or even Silver Bullet, but it was the perfect stepping stone from something like Pony Express or Jaguar to those more intense rides. As I'm sure for a lot of you viewing this right now, it was either your first or second launch coaster and potentially your first or second looping coaster in general, at least if you're a local at the park. And it's been doing that since 1978. So it's not just our generation. It's the generation before us and even potentially before them too. So there's just so much history to this ride, and it's also still such a fun ride overall. And there's nothing really bad I can say about it, except for maybe its short length. It's a little janky, and it only technically has like 3 elements, but it's still such a great spot at the park when you don't want to wait in those massive lines for Ghost Rider and Accelerator and still want to tame your hunger for the thrill. If you're wondering what my favorite and least favorites are about the ride, my favorite moment definitely has to be going backwards through that loop, with the close second being that launch. My least favorite's probably that first spike, just because it's not as interesting as the other one. And by far my favorite rows on this coaster are in the back car as well as that first row. I got some really great rides in the first row in the past couple of months especially, but for sure back car is usually my way to go. And in terms of least favorite seat, I guess somewhere in the middle, but let's be real, it doesn't give that much of a difference in terms of how the ride feels, except for maybe that backwards spike. So with that all said, let's get into my ratings of the ride. If you haven't seen these reviews before, I have kind of an unorthodox rating system. I start with a ski slope rating, realistically letting you know how experienced of a coaster rider you should be before taking on something like Montezuma's Revenge, an intensity rating and a fun rating out of 5 stars, and of course an overall score out of 10. So starting all of the ratings off, for the ski slope, it's definitely a black diamond. That launch is kind of intense, and of course going backwards and forwards through that vertical loop is a little more intense than some of the younger riders might be able to take on. I definitely recommend riding things like Pony Express, Jaguar, and of course Timberline, Twister, and Coast Rider before taking on Montezuma's Revenge. Moving on to that star rating though, I would definitely give this 4 out of 5 stars. While it doesn't have many moments, they're all pretty intense. And especially going backwards is not something people are used to, so it ends up feeling more intense than it actually is. But it's not nearly as intense, I would argue, as Silver Bullet or Accelerator or even Hang Time in the park, just because those are longer experiences overall and they have plenty of loops, crazy launches, or some pretty extreme airtime. In terms of fun though, this is definitely a 3 out of 5 stars for me. While it's more intensity focused, it does definitely have some fun moments. And of course, going backwards and forwards at 55 miles an hour is just a fun time all around. Now it's time for my rating out of 10. This might shock a couple of you, but this, for me, is an 8 out of 10. I think it's a fantastic ride overall, if you couldn't tell that already. But I sure am going to miss at least the original experience. Yet at the same time, I'm very excited to see what type of changes will be made for the ride in the future to make sure this ride can keep running and being enjoyable for guests for another 45 years. So now I have a question for you. What do you guys think of Montezuma's Revenge? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Let me know down in the comments below. And of course, while you're down there, make sure to check out all the links in the description for, of course, our Instagram, our Discord, and even the Parks Bros pins, which are still available. But I wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And if you haven't yet, make sure to subscribe. We've got more Knott's reviews and plenty of coaster reviews around the US coming very soon. But until then, we'll see you on the next ride.